I see folks logging on. I see the numbers climbing up, and I see ourselves getting ready to start. So I'm just going to give people a few more seconds to log on, and we will officially start. All right, we will go ahead and start. Welcome everybody to the Grassroots Advancement Programs Conservation Lands Foundation's webinar, The Changing of the Guard, What to Expect as the Biden Administration Moves Forward. My name is Andres Esparza. I'm the Grassroots Engagement Director here at CLF. We're really happy to have you all here for this webinar. This one is very, very exciting for us because we are entering into a new administration, a new relationship with the BLM, and a host of new opportunities and hope moving forward. And all of our friends, Grassroots Network, our staff, our board, and all our supporters across the world are excited to see what's going to be possible over these next 4 years. And we wanted to host this webinar early on to really get people in the right mind frame of what success is going to look like, how long it might take, and kind of lifted the veil a little bit on what's going on behind the scenes. We realize that a lot of what happens at DC isn't common knowledge, isn't intuitive, and often may not make sense if you're not there living, breathing it every single day. And something that we always strive for within our network is to make sure that folks on the ground, regardless of where you live, feel like they're a part of the democratic process, they're a part of the functions of government, and they know what's happening. And so our goal in this webinar is to make sure that we paint a very clear picture of, as we transition into the Biden administration, as we fully develop what this new administration is going to be able to accomplish in the realm of conservation, that we understand what's going on behind the scenes, what's going on with nominations, as people are put in positions, what is that going to set in motion? And more importantly, if it takes a long time, an understanding that that's okay for now. There's a lot of things going on, and we need to make sure we do it right so that we can do it right for the next 4 years. So to do that, we have 2 people who I'm going to introduce in just a moment who kind of represent that DC world in being able to be key players in making this stuff happen, either through previous posts, positions, or through their connections with the DC side of things. Real quick, before we introduce our panelist and moderator, if you all are on Zoom and joining us, go ahead and look at your toolbar down below. There's a few different functions I want to make you aware of real quick. There's a Q&A box. We're going to save questions for the end after David asks his questions and has a conversation with Hilary. But we do want to get to your questions. So put them in the Q&A box, and that'll be really helpful for myself as I'm managing these questions and I bring them up at the end. As well, right next to it is a chat box, and this is for general chat between y'all. But what I would love right now is for everybody to type in who you are, who you represent, and where you're calling in from. Just let's get this thing rolling, get you comfortable with the tools and showing where you're coming from, and then use the Q&A for specific questions that you want answered in this setting. So again, this is all in an effort to make sure that the functions of our government are as transparent as possible, and myself, our panelists, our moderator, and everybody else feel like they are a part of this great functioning government that we all strive for. And my hope is that by the end of this, you all will be able to go back to your kitchen tables and say, did you know that? And share some amazing bit of knowledge about your own government, knowing that we are all moving forward to create the world that we all want to have. It just may take a little bit more time than we think it needs to, but we're all getting there together. So for now, I want to introduce David Feinman, our Government Affairs Director. Here at CLF, David would be in some circles called a lobbyist, but I think in the way that we function at CLF, he's not a lobbyist. He's our direct connection to members of Congress. He's a field-facing person who happens to live in DC and whose job it is to distill all the DC madness into really everyday person language and connect all of us to our role in this government. So David, it is all you.
Thank you, Andres. And yeah, it has truly been madness for the last 4 years. I appreciate that sentiment. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us today. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with Hilary Tompkins. For those of you who have not met her or had a chance to work with her, I'll give her brief bio and then we'll dive into it. Hilary is a partner at Hogan Lovells law firm and a member of the board of trustees of the Conservation Lands Foundation. Her legal experience includes the areas of natural resources, environmental, energy, and Native American law. And her current practice ranges from environmental, energy, and natural resources matters to litigation, product compliance, and corporate due diligence. She's held high-level leadership positions in the public sector. Former President Obama appointed Hilary to serve in the Senate-confirmed position of Solicitor of the United States Department of the Interior. She was the first Native American to hold that position, which she served in for over 7 years. And prior to her Interior service, she was chief counsel to a state governor and served as a legal advisor to Indian tribes. She started her career in the prestigious Honors Trial Attorney Program at the U.S. Department of Justice. And Hilary was recently elected to serve on the Dartmouth Board of Trustees and is chair of the Communications Committee. And Hilary is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. Hilary, thank you again for taking the time to have this conversation with us today. The timing of this webinar, I think, is impeccable, considering we're wedged right between Deb Holland's first hearing today, and she'll have more questions asked of her tomorrow. So maybe you want to reflect for a minute on the amazing historical moment that we're in the middle of right now. And I think you might be on mute.
Yes, so it's great to be here. Thank you, David, for that nice intro, and Andres as well for setting us up so nicely. So it is a momentous day where we have the first Native American woman nominated to be Secretary of Interior. You know, I didn't believe I would see this in my lifetime, and it's so exciting. And I think it really is something that I have, as a Native woman, been working on throughout my lifetime, which is to say that Native Americans have such an strong connection to America, to who we are in our indigenous homelands, and that we should be in the highest levels of leadership in American society, and that we are here, that we are part of the fabric of this country. And I just think it's so important that we start lifting up all voices, all perspectives, bringing all of that to where we want to go as a country as a whole. And I think we are disadvantaged when we don't hear all of those voices. I think it really undermines, you know, our role as a country and as a leader in the world. I really believe that. And so I think this is such a historic day to see Deb Holland at her confirmation hearing. We knew that she'd get a lot of tough questions, which she did, but she didn't make any missteps, and she's in there. Hopefully it'll be to a Senate floor vote soon here. And it did reflect today. I think the hearing today reflects a lot of DC and the what we often call, you know, the political theater of what happens on the Hill. And a lot of that is what we witnessed today. I learned after serving at Interior for 8 years, you know, you just got to be tough and let a lot of it roll off your back. It's not personal, a lot of it. But it certainly gets you ready to lead and make, you know, tough policy calls on these really complex issues involving the Interior Department. So it's a great day, and I'm just so happy to be here with you and to share kind of my thoughts on policy making and how you can affect change through the federal government, having been in the government. So I'd love to hear David's questions and have a conversation here, and look forward to all your questions as well.
Great. And I think that your comments are actually a perfect segue into the first question. You know, it might not feel like we're deep into this administration for most folks, but we are actually more than a month in. And historically, this is somewhat late for secretaries of any federal agency, but particularly the Interior Department to come in. And so she had her hearing today and she'll have the second hearing tomorrow, and hopefully a vote will be coming. But her delay in taking the reins, if we assume she'll be confirmed, what does that mean for the work of the Interior Department? Has this delay slowed the ability of the department to actually move forward with transitioning policy from the past administration? Or are there people who are doing this work while she's moving through the confirmation process?
Yeah, so it is a little bit delayed, and obviously there was a lot of issues that Congress had to take up with issues with the transition and the impeachment trial that kind of affected the timing and negotiations between the parties about when the nominees will be heard in committee. But meanwhile, there are people at the department who are in acting roles, who are political Biden appointees, who are getting the work done. They are reviewing all of the issues and decisions that Trump's administration made. And they have also the benefit of the transition teams that Biden set up. Each transition team after the election in November worked very hard to put together policy papers and directions for the incoming, what they call the landing team, which comes in on January 20th. And so that landing team is at Interior. They are working around the clock to start implementing Biden's agenda and also looking at all of the past decisions of the Trump administration. The other thing I would add is that the career staff, these are folks, the tens of thousands of employees at Interior Department, they are also super busy as well, briefing the new leadership team and also helping them make these decisions. I've already worked on a couple of matters involving projects out in I say out in the West because I'm in Washington, D.C. I know many of you are out in the West, which I miss. I can't wait to get on a plane to get out there again soon. But I've been working with folks on projects that are kind of in that middle space of having action under the Trump administration affect the project, and then the new administration coming in and looking at how to address that impact that has happened on these projects. So that's happening even though we don't have a confirmed secretary. So there is work that's happening. And last point I'll make is I got nominated to be solicitor in April of 2009. It was a long time ago. And I didn't get confirmed until June. So yeah, so it's not unheard of. And they were all keeping the legal stuff intact while I was getting confirmed. And then when I came in, they were like, here's all the stuff, we've been working on and that you can pick up.
Yeah, that actually lends right into the next question. Another great segue. So, beyond the Senate confirmed positions, there's a lot of policy positions, people who implement policy that, there might be the people who were in the landing team, but then there's the transition to the people who actually move forward with the work over the next couple of years. And I think a second layer to that is so many unfilled, not political positions, but career official positions that were left unfilled or people retired in the last administration. So what is your sense of how long it'll take for the department and the Bureau of Land Management to really be fully staffed at all levels, both in DC and out West, to be able to fully move forward with the agenda of the new administration?
Yeah, I think especially for the career slots and if they're manager slots as well, it can take a long time because you also have to follow all of the personnel rules for hiring. And I just remember when I was there, it would take a long time to find qualified candidates, have them go through the process, and then interview them, give them an offer, have them accept. It would be, a couple months to hire key positions in the career side of the office. So, and I do think given the relocation of like BLM to Grand Junction, Colorado, and a loss of a lot of important institutional knowledge because of that, because many people didn't go, they either resigned or retired. That is a loss of important knowledge. And I know the new team's looking at, how to replenish that and rebuild that. I do think, though, it's important to get the right people that are up to the task and will be good leaders in the Department of Interior, especially on the career side, because when they're there, you want them to stay there for a long time and to build out the reforms that you're looking to implement. So I think it's important to make those decisions really carefully. Meanwhile, I don't know if you know, but Interior has like over 100 political slots. So it's massive. And I remember every week we'd have a Monday, I think it was Monday morning meeting of the whole political team at Interior, and we filled up a huge conference room. And so there are a lot of people who are going to be deployed, if they're not already, very, very soon. And their one job is to focus on implementing the Biden administration's agenda. So that's another part of the workforce you don't hear a lot about, but they're instrumental for sure.
Well, and I'm sure the day we're in today with COVID and first of all, just getting people settled in the jobs that in many cases are remote now that weren't, and people dealing with all the challenges they have in life also adds another layer to the complexity of putting
yeah. I was just talking with a colleague of mine and saying so Deb Holland, she's going through confirmation process. Her chief of staff, Jennifer Vanderhyde, is there at Interior in theory, but she's having to do it remotely. And it's been really hard because she can't go out and walk along, in the building. If you've been at Interior Department, it's gigantic.
Yeah.
There's and every office has its own hallway, and you can go down and visit with folks and connect with folks. And so you don't get that as a new person, right, to the department. And I think that's challenging. And I think that kind of, taking that into account these first 6 months they're in office and trying to figure out ways to communicate with them in a way that, is not burdensome to them is really important. Because it's just so much harder than meeting in person and having that connection, for sure.
If we can just for a moment kind of dip into the political reality that Deb Holland, I think, is facing, because I think we sense she'll be confirmed, but it'll probably be mostly party line vote. Maybe Republicans will vote for her, but what do you think that means for her ability to lead the department and actually advance the president's agenda when most, if not nearly all, Republicans will oppose her?
Yeah, I think, first of all, when we were there under Obama, we had a Republican-controlled Congress at one point. And it makes it hard because you can't always find, and now we obviously have a Democrat-controlled Congress, but it's a very tight, slim majority. And so I think what makes it challenging is that it's hard to find legislative solutions to some of these thorny issues, like the Antiquities Act, right? And national monuments. Could you get through Congress some permanent protection of bears' ears, for instance? Or could you get clarity that the Antiquities Act only allows presidents to establish monuments but not reduce them or destroy them? And I think it'll be challenging if you feel like you've got 50 senators who aren't in your camp and supportive of you. The other thing we dealt with a lot, and this will be less with the Democrat controlled Congress now, but we have election in 2 years for some of these slots on the Hill. And, you know, if there is a flip with it becoming Republican, then you're going to face a lot of oversight. So that's something we had under Obama, where we were prepping for hearings on oversight all the time. We were just like under the gun. And it's hard then to do your regular work to get your agenda out. So that's part of the challenge you can have if you don't have full support of the Congress, or at least a majority or 60 members in the Senate supporting you. It just can be tricky. But having said that, one of the things I learned just working for a state governor and working for Interior is you have executive power. And executive power, that means, the Interior Department, what laws do you already have and what can you use to make change? And so I do think that Biden's agenda for clean energy and addressing climate change, addressing environmental justice issues, there is a lot of authority in the Secretary of Interior's toolbox to require more cleanup of abandoned mines, which is something we heard at the hearings today that was discussed, or to not approve leasing in certain sensitive habitats or where there's Native American cultural resources, like at Chaco Canyon, that's an issue. Being able to decide, where leasing will occur, focusing on renewables and standing up renewables on public lands, conservation 30 by 30, Land and Water Conservation Fund, you can use funding to protect, areas that you want to protect. So I think there's a lot of tools there that you don't always need the bipartisan support to execute, but it just makes it harder if you need to legislate. And I do think there's some things you might want to try and legislate that it could be a little bit trickier for her, for sure. Yeah, so that's the reality. David, having been in DC, right? And I do think there's more, and maybe you could tell me if you agree or not, but sometimes there is bipartisan solutions and success, right? Like the Great American Outdoors Act is an example of that.
Yeah, I think
but you don't hear about it as much.
You don't hear about it. And actually when the Dingle Conservation Act passed a few years ago, it was only because of bipartisanship where everybody had leveraged their individual interests against the broader groups. And so everybody had a stake in it. And, you had a split Congress at that point. I think there is potential for that to happen in the next 2 years, since Joe Manchin leading the Senate Committee for the Democrats is supremely focused on bipartisanship, to the point that I think his colleagues are annoyed to some degree. But I think that there's potential and possibility maybe for another public lands package at the end of this Congress, or for truly bipartisan things to move forward. But I think as we're seeing in the hearings today, and we'll probably hear tomorrow too, a lot of the things that even Mr. Manchin might think are bipartisan, a lot of his Republican colleagues think, they're using the words extreme. And so we'll have to see I think, how it evolves over the next 2 years. I do think there is possibility for that, though.
Yeah, and I think I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on infrastructure legislation, because I know Biden's going to push for, rebuilding our roads and bridges and water treatment systems for tribes and, the whole gamut, rail, high-speed rail. And I do think our groups, our grassroots network should definitely keep an eye out for that stuff, because that's where you can add on conservation projects or things that for BLM, conservation system lands, designations, those sorts of things. Like they actually can create it's the key is to find where are those little bipartisan nuggets that exist and then ride on them if you can. You can't earmark and do special pork projects, but there are a lot of projects to get through, as you know, right?
Yeah, no, there's it's funny, those of us in DC, the running joke is it finally infrastructure week? Because we've been hearing about infrastructure week for years, and it might actually come in the next few months. And yes, like, you know, Conservation Lands Foundation is on the record supporting the civilian climate core concept that President Biden introduced in his executive order. And yeah, many members of Congress have expressed support for the idea that there's, you know, many positive outcomes that come from that. We obviously need updated infrastructure in a lot of realms, but it does help support local small community economies, and it puts people to work at a time where obviously we're challenged with our economy. So I do see something coming together in Congress around that. It might not be exactly what the president has proposed or what certain bills have outlined, but hopefully it doesn't get caught up in kind of the COVID package politics that we're seeing right now, where they're pretty much drawing down the political lines. But I think it would be great if Congress and the administration could come together and really implement an economic recovery package from COVID that invests people in working on public lands to build that infrastructure and protect landscapes.
Yeah, the other thing I think would be interesting is to see, I do think Secretary Holland to be, she could find some of, particularly like Navajo or some other tribes where they're transitioning from fossil fuel economies. You know, Navajo's been very dependent on coal as well as oil and gas. And then you having that situation provide the catalyst to show how to transition to a new economy, clean energy, conservation jobs, tourism, and show that you know that transition can occur. It does take a long time, but to find those solutions there, and a lot of what can happen in Indian country can happen in rural America too. And I think those are the places where you can build coalitions and community support. I think to kind of show that this evolution into a clean energy will not leave folks behind. So I think exploring those right off the bat, I think would be a really interesting and coalition building type effort that our groups might have ideas about where to help promote those kind of projects and community building for sure.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the things we'll be working with the Friends Grassroots Network on and other community partners is making sure that they're sharing their needs in the local communities with their members of Congress, and with eventually Secretary Holland, because she spoke today about how she wants to listen to everybody. She plans to really engage with communities as well as members of Congress to understand what the needs are. So I think we have the right type of network to help drive that policy discussion. So I guess, recognizing all the political realities and, the just the extraordinary times we're in with COVID and the pressures that will be on Secretary Holland and the administration and members of Congress who want to do this work. Can you maybe just speak to a little bit to, how our groups and folks in our community should manage their expectations about how this work gets done, how long it takes, and understanding, in a sense, the effort it takes to move the behemoth that is the bureaucracy to do all of this work, and the thousands of people who were involved in actually taking the laws and the policies and the ideas down to each community to do the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, so things do move slowly, when I was solicitor, I was working on things that were still unresolved, where there had been meetings held, a decade before. I mean, I had every week there'd be something that was like a 20-year-old dispute, a 10-year-old dispute. And on some of them, they were really tricky calls. Like if I ruled against one person or one group, they would, they'd be really unhappy. But it was really important from my perspective to make those decisions so people had certainty. It's almost like the delay and the lack of action is worse, right? Because you can't plan and you can't then shift to the new facts on the ground. So there was a lot of that at Interior, I'd say, just like unanswered, unresolved stuff. And so I tried my best, and I know my colleagues did too, to kind of, resolve a lot of those longstanding issues. So the new team is encountering that because, there's always that kind of stuff. And then you have your own new initiative coming in too. And it could be an old issue, but it could be a new issue. And my advice to folks is what was always really helpful and made things move more quickly was one, when you engage with officials, right out the bat in the first 5 minutes or less, what do you need? What do you want? What do you want this official to do? And it sounds simple, but I can't tell you how many meetings I was in where it was like this wandering, meandering, and I had half-hour meetings scheduled back to back, issue to issue. And I was just like, please, I want to help you, but you're not telling me what you need. And so really knowing what you need, then providing how you get there. And so that was the other thing that was really common is like, maybe you know what you want, but you don't really know how to get there. And for me, it was on the legal side often. And the folks that I met with that were the most compelling and became top priority were when they had analyzed or written out, and this is just on the law side, it doesn't have to be a long written thing, but on the law, we tend to overwrite things and think things, but they would give me the law on why that I could then do what they wanted. So whatever that equivalent is for you all, maybe it's the law, maybe it's the, a program, maybe it's funding. What are the tools to get you there? And then the really third important thing I would say is talk to people who are impacted by this decision and see if there's a solution with your opponents. If there's not a solution with your opponents, understand that opposition and explain why you've done your best to address that concern. Maybe it's an unfair concern and you can articulate that to the official. And then also explain why moving forward is going to be still something that is the right thing to do. And you've shown that official you've thought it through. I mean, I think so setting expectations, if you can articulate that to your official that you're meeting with, that official then can move faster on your issue because there's 10 other people meeting with that official who didn't do that. And their stuff is kind of just sitting there. It's like headaches, like quagmire. I can't get out of this. You want your thing to be crisp, clear, possible. And then, so you tee it up to them, but then find out the career people who might work on it too. Stay on top of it. keep those lines of communication open. If there's new positive information, keep that coming in. Like, don't just then let it sit, because then it might take a long time. And know that people are overworked too. I mean, this is bringing me back, you know, to like, let me tell you one thing not to do. Don't go into an official meeting and like harangue them and say like, this is, you know, this is so wrong. Like, as I don't know, we're people too. Like, usually you're overworked, you're overtired, you're trying to do the right thing. And I've had people come in and go off. And I'm just like, you know, and it's not something that happened 10 years ago, right? So those are all my little tips for how you engage so your stuff will move and be something that someone wants to help you with and get done. But it can take a long time too.
That's tremendous advice. And as a former Hill staffer, I can appreciate what you experienced on the other side too, because I got similar not so successful lobbying strategies from folks. And yeah, I mean, at the core, it's all about building relationships, right? You're trying to learn how to influence these people to do the work that you're asking them to do. And I've always found in my work, and you know, when I work with friends groups who are advocating, I try to impress this many of the same things you said, that it's about building and maintaining relationships and giving them the tools that they need to do the work you're asking them to do in a way that's helpful for them. And so, as you said, you know, half-hour meetings where you don't get anything out of it. I try to, when I go into a meeting, especially now when it's digitally, I try to get in within 5-10 minutes exactly what it is that I'm trying to get across, and why it benefits them and how they can get to a resolution that works for everybody. So I think that was very
that
well.
made me think of something else unique to Interior.
Yeah.
I do think this is major, that we are shifting from fossil fuel dominant agenda under Trump to clean energy climate under Biden.
Yeah.
And for Interior, that is super sea change for that agency. And there are also legal obligations that Interior has to fossil fuel developers that they can't breach. Like, they will be engaged in what we call unlawful takings of property rights. And so, really important to like see that there's a part of Interior, because of the Mineral Leasing Act, the Hard Rock Mining Act, FLIPMA, parts of FLIPMA, that are on the books. Like, it's only if Congress changes that stuff that it changes. And so there's a part of Interior that's like, wait, but this is what we're supposed to be doing. Fossil fuels on public lands. In climate change, Interior, even under Obama, we were arguing why we didn't have to look at all climate change impacts from oil and gas. And so now they're like, whoa, we're going to have to change what we're saying in court. And we got to get DOJ to change what we're saying in court. So it's a big sea change, and that takes time. Having said that, there's a big part of Interior that's conservation, protection of sacred lands, sacred sites. You know, so it's a funny agency. What do you call it? It's got like two different missions wrapped up in the same building. And when I was there, they're always in conflict. And then also the trust responsibility for tribes, all of that, water, you know, management in the West, all of it is just constantly kind of in a state of conflict. So they're going to have to go through that and figure out how to reconcile. They're in a reconciliation process, and then trying to put climate and conservation as paramount. So it's just a big change. That goes to the expectations question. It just will take time, but I think our projects are great and can be low hanging fruit to help support the conservation side. And I think the more it's not wrapped up into one of those legal rights on the energy side, it'll be easier to deploy.
Indeed. And we have a few questions from folks who are in, and I want to also add another question that came up. While you were in your role, you looked at the law and the political implications of interpreting and enforcing laws and the enormous implications for various communities that has. How important is it to the bureaucracy to see the grassroots supporting certain initiatives? Can communities, through better advocacy and more, I guess, aligned advocacy, actually guarantee better outcomes from the perspective that you were looking at them legally?
Absolutely, no question. We would always want to know what the views were on the ground on a particular issue. And if there was a strong grassroots movement at play, with an effective campaign, right? So we were hearing about it. Yes, that definitely makes a difference. I think also having your congressional delegation, whatever region you're in, if you can find allies, I think finding allies is key. So it's whenever there was something that was like multi-stakeholder support for something, be it like you often see things with like enviros, tribes, outdoor recreation, hunting, rancher. Like if there was a coalition around that, it was super powerful. But even if it was, one of those grassroots efforts, it's powerful. The one thing I would say though, and I think it is kind of a harsh reality of DC inside the Beltway, I think understanding the politics is super important. And it's hard when I say politics because it's kind of amorphous, but understanding, can that Secretary of Interior, can that solicitor or BLM director do what you're asking them to do? Like there could be support from a grassroots group, but if they can't do it for some other reason, not related to your efforts, not related to the merits of doing it, it's really important to understand that. Because sometimes things are not feasible. When we came into office under Obama, we were in the recession. It's really, really difficult to talk about climate and environmental protection because then it would be, loss of jobs and we're in a recession. And though that political reality is very real to decision makers. So I guess my only point is don't know those politics and know what you're asking of an official they can do. Because those are very real.
Speaking of that, we have a question from Crystal White, which I think is a great question. What is the best way to support Indigenous communities trying to obtain basic human needs? And she referenced water. In this political realm, because I think it's, to your point, we're kind of in the same place we were at the beginning of the Obama years, right? Where we're obviously in a recession because of COVID, and it's very easy to just let that bigger political football become a reason not to do things, right?
Right. Yeah. Great question. I actually have written a paper on this, which I could share with you all. I'll send it.
That would be great.
David, on water in particular and basic needs. I actually think you do need to find that bipartisan support in Congress. Now the Dems are in control. And I think, so a perfect example is I've been advocating at Navajo, Congress needs to build a drinking water system supply in those areas that we know from COVID were hit hard, who didn't have drinking water. It's unacceptable. It's just it's a human right. And so they need to fund it, build it, make it happen pronto, not wait 10 years, 20 years, 30 years to figure out the tribe's water rights, because that's what's the way we're doing it now. We first have to settle the water rights, and the US has to be sure it's not going to be sued by the tribe to get water, and then Congress will give money to build the water system. And I'm saying that's backwards. And I actually think there could be support for this. I mean, in this climate, right? That's reading the politics, like David just said. And yes, COVID has laid bare the fact there are people in this country who do not have drinking water accessible in their home. So that is a compelling message, and hopefully you could get bipartisan support to provide for a drinking water system. But knowing Interior or Indian Health Service maybe can do part of it on the executive branch side. They have some power and money, but they probably don't have enough. So knowing, oh, I got to go to Congress to get the rest of it. So knowing where you need to get what you're trying to achieve. But that's how you can be effective, is figuring that all out and then saying to the decision makers, this is what we need and why, and this is why this is a good thing, and this is very much in the national discourse, that sort of thing.
Another great question from Susie Boyd, and this goes back, I think, to the inherent conflict of how Interior functions as an agency, but also, you know, the broader political dialogue in this country about, you know, the economic transitions required with the energy transitions we're looking at. Any insights into transition to clean energy as workers' concerns are over the gap between pay as fossil fuel workers relative to becoming renewable energy workers? You know, there's, I guess, maybe I can also explain that a little bit. Yeah, we could have a whole hour on that, but it's like the pay gap, but also just that transition of moving from doing oil and gas work to, you know, windmills or whatever it is that transition looks like for actual workers. That is a sticking point, I think, for a lot of folks. And frankly, it's being used in the hearing for Deb Holland, you know, as kind of a sticking point for why people shouldn't support her. So what do you think that looks like in terms of how we can help try to advance that dialogue?
Yeah, it's a little bit, you know, remains to be seen how the new administration cracks that nut. But I think it's a matter of identifying new economies, be they renewables. It might not be a straight one-for-one translation.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you've got to find a diversified market in rural communities in particular, where oil and gas is occurring, or coal. But having the Civilian Conservation Corps, having renewables, which they take a lot of people to build, but not necessarily to operate, right? And then also finding, one of the things I'm actually talking on later this week is e-commerce for tribes, but e-commerce opportunities, conservation, economic opportunities in the sense of, you know, can you get a return? A lot of agricultural enterprises are engaging in carbon sequestration type activities, and it's actually producing revenue for them. So I think it's going to require a diversification of markets in those areas where they were fossil fuel dependent. And I think it's going to be a multi-agency solution on the federal side, not something just solely for Interior to tackle. And it relates to issues with small business administration, agriculture, you know, innovation in new technologies with Department of Energy. These are complex problems. What about the royalties?
Right.
Coming off of renewables versus oil and gas, and the fossil fuel royalties go to conservation protection, right? And so if you're, that was a point made at the hearing. So I do think the one thing that gives me hope and energy around is I think there are places that you all know about in this country and communities where some of these solutions can grow. And it might be small scale, but that's fine. And actually, people in DC don't know where those communities are. Like, we're dependent on you all to find them. But when you have success stories like that, then it can replicate and you can build off of it and you can model it and you can deploy it elsewhere. And that's what we need. I think that is going to facilitate the change that we're looking for to show that it works.
I think that's a perfect way to leave it.
Yeah.
You've answered all the questions. And first, I want to thank you, Hilary. I've really enjoyed this, and thank you for taking the time and you sharing your expertise with everybody on the video here. And I want to thank everybody who joined as well and asked questions. And there will be a recording of this being sent out afterwards. So thanks again to everybody and to you, Hilary, for the time. And if folks have other questions, we can certainly take those offline and try to help folks have an understanding of kind of what we have to see going forward with this new administration and how we can interface with them properly.
Yes, I'm excited to see what you all are going to be working on this year. It's just really terrific, the work that you do, and it does matter, and it can make an impact and change. And so I'm here as a resource to help out. And kudos to CLF and the great work that you all are doing to support these efforts. I told David and Andres that this was the highlight of my day to talk with all of you. So thank you. And Navajo, thank you for your time and look forward to future discussions.
Great. Thanks, Hilary. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Bye.